This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. Over the next several weeks, I'll be featuring a range of conversations that took place recently at and around the world's largest NFT conference, NFT.NYC. On today's episode, I speak with artist, author, and collector Anne Spalter. Anne's artwork combines traditional mark making, digital tools, and a collection of symbols to produce work that is highly collected. Her large-scale public art installations are in high demand, with one living in New York City's busiest commuter hub for almost a year. Nearly 3 decades ago, Anne created the first digital art classes at Brown and the Rhode Island School of Design. That led to her writing the book, The Computer in the Visual Arts, which has become the go-to text for the instruction of the topic. In the process of writing that book, she and her husband, Michael Spalter, found a passion for collecting historically significant works of digital art. The Anne and Michael Spalter Digital Art Collection, aka Spalter Digital, is now one of the world's largest private collections of early computer art, comprising over 900 works from the second half of the 20th century. That being said, no one can speak with more authority about the state of digital art than today's guest. And now, a conversation about digital pioneers and AI dreams with Anne Spalter. Anne Spalter, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Anne, I know that you have been teaching, writing, collecting, making digital art for going on 3 decades. How did this become your passion?
I loved art, was creating art, ended up going to art school, was happy as a traditional artist, and in fact didn't like the idea of using a computer in the arts. So I was really kind of against it to begin with. I thought you had to be using your hand, interact with a physical medium. The idea that you would write some instructions and it would, make something. I wasn't on board with that at all. But I graduated and it was the 80s. My parents stopped sending me a check. I actually had 3 majors at Brown. Visual art, mathematics, but just pure math.
Sure.
And a sort of literature-based independent thing, which you can do at Brown.
Right.
I thought I'd get some fantastic job, but it was like my majors were so abstract. The career office, I did a strength sort of test. They said, you can be an actuary. I had to look that up. It was like, you predict when people will die. I ended up going into banking because it was the 80s. Everyone was going into investment banking. Didn't really know what that was. It turns out to be very lucrative, so it was good. I made money, but you work 1 million hours a week. I had no time to do art, but I had a computer.
Right.
So because I'm actually an artist at heart, I began making art on the computer in my little cubicle.
Right.
And I began realizing how powerful a tool it is to make art with.
Right.
I also began realizing I was not a banker.
Right.
And that I should maybe go back and get an MFA or leave banking. So I applied to RISD as a graduate student in painting and got accepted and went back. And I thought, okay, I'm done with the computer again. I'm just going to make a painting. And then I did something and I regretted it. And I thought undo, in my mind.
Right.
I'm so used to being there. And nothing happened because I was back in the analog world. And I just realized it's such a powerful visual thinking tool. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to combine the power of the computer, but also, the lovely feeling of analog media. So that sort of was my project as a graduate student. And I've been using the computer ever since in different ways.
What's interesting in your story, just a few weeks ago, I had artist Sarah Morris on my podcast, who also went to Brown, who also didn't study art. She studied a philosophy degree very akin to poli-sci, right? And so, I think it's something really interesting about Brown that, both of you went there. Didn't necessarily study art, but art.
I did study art. I mean, I actually began at RISD. So I studied art at RISD. I transferred to Brown. Most of my classes were at RISD.
Sure.
But I just didn't study, the computer and art. And actually, as a graduate student, I wanted to take classes to learn more about the computer and art, and there weren't any.
Right.
And I was asked to teach one to, help everyone learn more about it. And so it was sort of the one-eyed leading the blind, but It's a great way to learn more about something. And because there weren't really the resources I needed to do that, also led to my writing the book that I eventually published.
So you went to RISD to get your MFA.
Yep.
I got that right. Okay. And so then did you go from there to teaching at RISD? And
I started teaching their first fine art digital computer course, and then Brown asked me to teach a version of it as well, and for a while I taught a joint Brown RISD digital fine art class. Then I was moved sort of into the computer science department at Brown, which was fantastic, and they have an amazing internationally recognized computer science department. I got to work with Andy Van Dam, who is a co-founder of the department and a huge figure in the computer science graphics field.
Sure.
And worked there in the computer graphics research group, doing just like creative graphics research, interface design, and was an artist in residence with the computer graphics research group for over 10 years.
So you came to this space at a point where there's no textbook, there's no curriculum, there are no lesson plans, or looking back, I feel like a lot of the instruction kind of started with you and your book, The Computer and the Visual Arts.
Well, I mean, there were schools that were School of Visual Arts had started a program, so there were people doing things, but certainly not to the extent that there are today.
Right.
And a lot of us were developing our own things.
We're obviously sitting here in the world's largest NFT conference, right? What is it about NFTs that pique your, did NFTs pique your interest right away? I mean...
So this is something I never would have predicted or anticipated. And when I began using the computer in my art, as many artists discovered, there was a lot of hostility and pushback. So when I, told people, visiting critics, when I was a grad student, I use the computer to make this, people literally refused to look at my work. Not even like I saw it and I don't like it, but I won't look at it because he used a computer. And many of the pioneering artists who, now are being asked to do museum shows and things, could not get their work shown anywhere for decades because of the hostility from the traditional art world to anything using a computer.
So why is that? Why is it that it was a medium that was overlooked by the art world?
It's still overlooked by the art world. Right. I think, like a lot of the reason that we began collecting, Michael Spalter was art history major at Brown, and when I was writing this book, it took me over 6 years to finish it. So he had to learn a lot about digital art living with me. And as an art history major, he said, you know what, these people, they're like the Impressionists. Right. They all know each other. They have bodies of amazing work. They show together. They've studied art, they're sophisticated people, but they're really separate from the academy. Right. And they're like the Impressionists. They're like every art movement I've ever studied. Right. So, and we should help support them and champion this movement. And that's how we actually started collecting their work. So I think it's actually a kind of a common story in the art world. And maybe it's even unfolding faster than other movements. Yeah. We're just sort of accustomed with the internet to things happening, really quickly. But so some part of it is just that it's new. Sure. Other reasons are that the computer, when those artists started using it, you didn't have, like the computer we have in our phone, which is more powerful than the one used to, send men to the moon. Right. They could only use computers in big institutions like Bell Labs, the government, corporate computers. So it was associated with things that many artists didn't vibe with. Right. And you had to learn how to program. They didn't have screens in the beginning. You had like a stack of punch cards. Someone would run them for you at 2 a.m. You didn't know what you would get. It was extremely challenging and somewhat bizarre. And also the hand wasn't involved.
Right.
So similarly to photography, where in the beginning, people said, oh, it's not an art form. Anyone can press a button and get a photo. And then after a while, people realized like, Ansel Adams presses the button. It's different than when you press the button.
That was part of the comment I had made on the panel, is that I feel like there's been a long history of the art world being tied up with craftsmanship and a number of hours there, and a lot of that has changed since things have since we've gone through conceptualism and minimalism, and what's between an artist's ears is more important than how it's being executed, and that's the reason we're able to have teams in the studio execute an artist's vision. But in some way, I feel like part of the reason it was discounted is because they felt like the computer was somehow, cutting corners. Is that true?
No, I think that is, and that's still an issue, that there's an assumption that the computer is sort of usurping the creativity of the artist and doing something that it shouldn't be, taking over some sort of role of creativity. And I think part of it has also been a kind of CP Snow, like two cultures problem. So, he said that like artists, scientists and humanities people don't understand each other and don't speak the same languages. And the problem is often on the humanities side of things. So if you ask a scientist about Shakespeare, they know about Shakespeare. Right. But if you ask humanities people about, the second law of thermodynamics, they often don't know what you're talking about, even though these things are equally important. So art critics often have no idea what a computer program is, what an algorithm is, how these artworks were made. So it's hard to understand them and why they're important. So they looked at them and it just looked like people didn't understand that modernism had already happened. And they were sort of, revisiting it, but too late.
When I go to your website and I look at your CV, the oldest date there is your book. And then, your history of exhibitions and media, those dates start at like 2016.
It got so long. I took all that off the web.
I was trying to figure out, like, well, is it...
It looked ridiculous having this pages and pages of stuff.
Trying to figure out, has it been, condensed, or was there a point where you were just shot out of a cannon?
No. No, I started showing things much earlier, but mostly people want a CV that's like 3 or 4 pages, so I figure that.
And so what has been your artistic journey, not as a collector and not as an instructor, but as an artist, like, climbing that hill yourself as a digital artist? What has that been like?
It's been the same since I was an undergrad, and throughout all the different media that I've used. It's kind of been the same kind of imagery and symbols, and I think that's true for a lot of artists. You kind of find what you are fascinated by or you're working on, and you're kind of working on that sort of for the rest of your life. I don't know, like, it's your thing, and you can't really escape it, and you could be drawing about it or painting about it or using a supercomputer. That's like your challenge. So all my work, it's got highways and airplanes and lighthouses, and it's all landscapes. Not really people. That's the way it is. So it's that sort of independent of the media.
And so modes of transportation.
Like modern landscape, say, is one way of describing it, and then like symbols, it's kind of from the collective unconscious, but like updated for our time. So Jung wrote about the collective unconscious, and he used things from his time. So he didn't have like spaceships, or actually he wrote an amazing book on spaceships, so that's a bad example. But trying to use contemporary things, but that resonate not just for me, but for everyone.
So what is it about that theme? I mean, is it about the fact that it's ubiquitous and everybody engages, or is there some underlying thing about transportation transforming as, in your mind, what does it mean to you?
I think often it's sort of like a freedom, escape, travel, trying to, transcend and go somewhere new and break through to somewhere.
Can you tell me about your recent work? You've started using more and more AI. For the listener, Anne's eyes just got really big and she smiled.
I'm obsessed with AI now.
Tell me why. Why are you obsessed with AI? Tell me what it's meaning to your body of work.
Yeah, I think AI is going to change the art world, and it's already enormously influencing the NFT world. It enables, I think, more people to create amazing artwork and amazing visual things. And it's so bizarre.
Right.
So I started out doing GAN-based things, generative adversarial networks.
Right.
You have sets of images, and you kind of have two sets of images sort of pitted against one another, but you're essentially trying to make new elements of a set of images that are like the other elements of that set of images. So I did a whole series, and I had some images of airplanes, and it was trying to make new images of airplanes, but it didn't really succeed, and in that process made all kinds of bizarre compositions that looked like crashed planes and spaceships and fantastical things that had a weird perspective that AI makes. It's not 3D perspective, it's not flat, it's its own strange world.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part I find exhilarating about it, is that it seems to get closer to surrealism than a lot of the people that are intentionally trying to get to surrealism. I mean, there's like this juxtaposition and, ephemeral feel that, when I look at it, it almost feels like very dreamy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like there's
something
in
that
the
appeals
ether.
To me.
Yeah.
Because it is like it's dreaming. It's sort of like the machine is looking into its mind, especially when you use text-to-image AI, which is what I've been using recently.
Right.
And that actually taps into these huge databases like ImageNet. So you have millions and millions of images scraped from the web.
Right.
And it's looking into that whole kind of cultural image repository. So it is sort of a collective unconscious.
It's like looking at the alt text descriptions on these images from across the web, and it's training itself and responding to your text input based on kind of meshing
on categorizations of those images. And the bizarre thing is that naming the objects on those images is done by hand, by people.
Right.
So it really is sort of an interaction of minds, of all these different minds at once.
Wow, this converging collective.
So it's kind of a strange group project, and it brings up a lot of issues of authorship and originality. So although I think people's concerns about the early generative artwork were really misplaced, about whether the machine was really being creative, or now some of those actually are pretty valid. Where is the creativity?
Right.
If you type in a phrase of a few words and you get an amazing image, are you the author because you typed in 3 words? Is the person who wrote the, neural programming? Is the prompt writer?
Yeah.
Is it because you chose it and it fits your body of work?
Right.
A lot of strange things.
So you were mentioning earlier the AI, like airplanes, right? And I saw a number of those on your site that were paintings.
Yeah.
And so, I guess that, using the AI to get there conceptually and then putting the craftsmanship back in there as a painting, I guess it kind of answers some of that, skepticism from someone that where's your hand in here, right?
Yeah, and I have to say that I showed those at an art fair called Spring Break Art Show, which is an amazing art fair that everyone should attend. And I've been in it for many years in a row, although I didn't apply this year as the first year. I haven't applied in forever. usually I have some sort of weird digital thing, and maybe I sell like one or two pieces. That year I made oil paintings and I sold out my whole room. So yeah, people like traditional artwork. It's still a much easier
And people
thing
keep
to
saying,
present.
people keep on proclaiming that painting is dead,
Yeah.
right?
No, I don't know. It's been around for hundreds of years. Doesn't seem to be. It's beautiful. Oil paintings are beautiful.
Yeah.
I have nothing against oil paintings.
Right.
And but I made those because it was the earlier days of all of these processes, and the output was very low resolution.
Right.
So I actually couldn't show it the way that it was delivered to me. And that I thought, how can I use this great composition? And I thought I can, blow it up and render it
Yeah.
by oil painting it.
So that brings up a great topic, which is scale. I see that some of your work may be as small as 10 inches square, and some of your work may be as large as 47,000 square feet. Tell me about the role of scale in your artwork, and how do you choose? And I guess the technology is catching up to the point where this can be as big as you want it to be, right?
It's still hard with AI because it's so computationally expensive that most of the output is pretty low resolution by the standards that people are used to working at. If it's a vector-based thing, which a lot of the algorithmic art is, you can be any scale. Mm-hmm. If you're working with a raster graphics, Photoshop, kind of photographic-based thing, then you can be more limited. But I like things to be large scale because it is largely landscape artwork. So if it's at a scale where you're in the landscape, I think that does work well for a lot of my pieces. So I've done a lot of installation work and public artwork where you're immersed in some kind of space, and the artwork's around you.
Somebody that only knows about artwork online maybe doesn't appreciate color field painting unless they go to a museum and they stand in front of a Rothko, for example, and are, just enveloped in the art, right? And so...
Yeah, it's ironic that a lot of digital artwork doesn't look good just seeing it on a screen. If it was created on a plotter.
Right.
It can be a lot of very fine lines and amazing detail that you just don't see if you're looking at a little image on your screen or on your phone. So it's actually wonderful to go to shows of early computer artwork, and a lot of work looks better on a large monitor,
right?
Or it's actually created in some way that you need to see it in person.
So now you're beginning to sound like a collector. And so that'd be a great transition to, what do you look for when you're collecting digital art? Like, what is it, are there particular qualities, or is it a gut feel, something that speaks to you? Or is it somehow tied to what your perception of like the historical significance of this work is going to be?
The collection is very focused mostly on the early digital, computer artwork, but we only collect things that we like.
Right.
So the theory from the beginning has been, if all of this turns out to be something that no one else appreciates, we love it, so it'll be something amazing to have on the wall. Like, you can't lose that way. So I think people that collect sort of more for speculation, it's a different mindset.
Sure.
So we've never sold anything, and I don't think I could acquire something that I don't think is a good piece of art. I don't know, it would be painful.
So let me ask you, as an artist, do you do much trading with the other artists?
Yeah, especially with NFTs. So one of the many things that I like about NFTs is it's really easy to trade work. So, I have a lot of artist friends, and in the traditional art world, we've often said, we should trade work or collaborate. But the logistics of it, it's like, it's hard to do. It does happen, but it's harder. But with NFTs, it's like, what's your wallet address? And it's like a few clicks of the mouse, and so much more frequent.
I was having the conversation backstage with the other panel members here at NFT.NYC. I was explaining that I was going to be talking with you and, your background as a collector of,
this historically significant digital artwork, and people were very interested to know where are the origins, right? And I have taught art history, and I just within my lifetime have seen such a drastic change in what we consider the canon of art, right? My question to you is there someone in in your collection in this digital art space that you foresee in 20, 30 years that is going to be discovered and recognized to be on par in terms of significance as their traditional art world contemporaries of their generation?
I think a whole bunch of them will be. And the one who I think even right now is becoming recognized that way is Vera Molnar. You can tell we really hear it at NFT.NYC. Vera Molnar, whose work is amazing, is really at the age of 98. Becoming internationally recognized and shown and written about and collected by MoMA here in New York and other major museums, and I think rising right up to that level.
Right. So a lot of that art, based on what you were discussing earlier, how a lot of, when we think about the early days of computer art, we're talking about punch cards and mainframes that filled up entire basements. Was a lot of the output from those early pieces physical, like plot, or were they using a plotter? Like what of the work that we have, like what does it look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah, it's India ink on paper, drawn with a plotter. Some of the work is photographed from a screen. So we have actually some early work that's photographed from an oscilloscope. Mm-hmm. So it's even like pre-digital.
Sure.
But mostly plotter based, because there were like raster based printers.
Absolutely.
So they were impact printers later on, but artists like plotters, and artists still use them. I don't know if you see like plottables, and people have the AxiDraw now. It's beautiful plotter, and unlike an inkjet printer that prints raster, like line, the plotter draws, so the ink or whatever you're drawing with, the lines go on top of each other.
Sure.
So you have the physics of light going through multiple layers of media.
Sure.
It's not one flat surface.
Oh, right. So let me ask you your opinion. Like, where do you think we are in terms of this space, and where do you think we're headed?
Well, that kind of ties back to, you were asking me about NFTs.
Yeah.
So when I saw art blocks and the on-chain generative art, I thought this is sort of a direct descendant of what these pioneers were doing, sort of the long-form generative art. I thought a lot of them would be really excited about it. Turned out not to be the case. Some were, many not. But I think it's like genetically very related and very exciting. And I was excited that so many young artists were doing this and so enthusiastic about it. And it's also wonderful that now they're discovering these older artists and their work, and they're actually becoming a real collector base for those artists' work. So it's like a wonderful circle in history.
Absolutely.
Of artists and collectors.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Anne, if somebody wanted to follow you and maybe see your collection, find out more about everything Anne Spalter, where's the best place to follow you?
On social media, and my website is just Anne Spalter, all one word, all lowercase.
That's
A-N-N-E.
Anne with an E.
Yep, and S-P like Peter, A-L, T like Thomas, E-R. And the collection is spalterdigital.com.
Well, Anne, I cannot say thank you enough for you being generous with your time and talking with me, and being willing to open up about your passion.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.